Hello, my name's Karen. Welcome to Responsible Chicken Breeding. I'm here with APA judge and passionate poultryman Jim Atkins, that way. And we are going live to talk chickens, build community, and hopefully inspire you to bring out the best in your birds. How's it going today, Jim?
Oh, good. Very good. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Well, I had a big blur and then hey, our second episode. This is so cool. Hopefully we had one of those little StreamYard glitches last week, and we have done everything we can to prepare to make sure that doesn't happen again. So, hey, this is great. We have our first live guest that's going to be joining us a little bit later. So that's cool, huh, Karen?
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, I like to hear you talk, but there's sometimes other people are okay too.
Oh, and you'll love this guy. He's a hoot, and I'm excited to have one of my very good chicken friends, longtime chicken friends, on the show with us today. And so, what are we jumping into here to begin with, Miss Karen?
You know what? Let's start with our breed of the week. How do you think about that?
That sounds great. Sounds great. Let's do it. Well, I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to tell you about, I have kind of my top favorite birds. And I suppose if you put me in a corner and said, what are your top three? I would probably tell you that the New Hampshire chicken is one of my top three chickens. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. I started to tell you last week, and I'm going to tell you again today, that so many of you are familiar with what we call a dual-purpose chicken. A dual-purpose chicken. And simply what that means is that chicken is good for meat, and that chicken is good for eggs. It has a dual purpose. But as I introduced to you last week, I told you that the black Australorp chicken it's a dual purpose, but it had a primary purpose of eggs. When it was first developed, it was definitely its focus and its primary purpose was one of egg production. And, the New Hampshire chicken is the same way. I love we don't have a ton of history about the New Hampshire, but what little history we have, it is so cool. I want you to remember this, that back pre-1950, in the late 40s and the early 50s, that's when the Cornish cross chicken, the Tyson chicken, a big, fast-growing broiler, that's when it kind of came on the scene. But prior to the Cornish cross broiler, do you know this, that the New Hampshire chicken and the Delaware chicken were the top two meat birds in North America? The top two meat birds. And so when the New Hampshire was developed, it was all about meat. It was all about meat. And we're I'm going to just tell you a little bit about it. Actually, we're going to get into a little bit more of the history later. But I want you to remember all the pictures you're seeing. A New Hampshire was primarily a meat chicken. And just like all of the other breeds, when you look at the standard of perfection, they all had standard weights. And I hinted at it last week that, that at some point we should talk about the value of weights and how important that is. But here's a couple of unique things about the New Hampshire. It has yellow skin. So, a broiler chicken, even our modern day broilers, they have yellow skin, and that's the color of skin on a chicken that we are most familiar with when it comes to eating it. They lay a brown egg. They have, you can see it in most of the photos, all of I mentioned last week, and we'll mention it with every breed that we talk about, and that is that there's several different kinds of combs, but a New Hampshire has a single comb. It has a single comb. And I'll also mention this. Now, this could take me down a rabbit trail, and I don't want to do that. But you know that the average chicken that is eaten in America across the globe is processed at about 37 days of age. 37 days of age. And when you talk about standard bred poultry, like all the different breeds in the standard of perfection, and when you talk about the birds, the chickens that really fed our forefathers and our great-grandmothers and our great-great-grandparents, you know, the fastest growing broiler type chicken was a Delaware, and that was about 12 to 14 weeks. About 12 to 14 weeks. Now, but a New Hampshire, it's in its heyday as a broiler, the ideal slaughter age was about 14 to 16 weeks. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the New Hams. They're in their heyday. They were a very desirable broiler. As I mentioned to you, they're their second fastest growing bird compared to a Delaware. And if you think and look about a lot of the industrialized, the hybrids, like you heard of a chicken called maybe you've heard of it called a Freedom Ranger or a Red Ranger or a Red Broiler. They can all be traced back, or most of them can be traced back to the New Hampshire. You know, they have a beautiful carcass. They have a beautiful carcass. Now, let me also mention this. Some of you might be, wait a minute, Mr. Jim, I always thought that a New Hampshire was just a really, really good, popular egg layer. Well, you need to understand something, all right? It was a broiler, a meat chicken to begin with, but it was still a dual-purpose breed. So it would still, in its heyday, it would still produce anywhere from 180 to 220 eggs a year. But when you talk primary purpose, when you talk why was the bird created, the bird was created to be a faster growing meat bird. And like I said, when I have a little bit later in the show with one of our guests today, or our only guest, we'll tell you a little bit more about that history. But if you breed a New Hampshire and you improve the carcass through breeding, you will have a carcass that dresses very, very nice. All right. So what are some of the faults when you're breeding a New Hampshire? Let me just talk about them for a few minutes. All right. For one thing, there's a lot of different ideas about what a New Hampshire should look like. And hopefully, once this show is over, it'll help you to discern what really are the key characteristics of a New Hampshire. How can I tell the difference? But one of the common faults is there's such variation in the progeny. And what I mean by variation is you may see some pictures that we're sharing, and you may look at some chicken hatchery catalog and go, what I'm seeing on the screen and what I'm seeing in this catalog, they're totally different. That's what I mean by variation. A lot of times you can get, you can get high tails in New Hampshires. You get narrow bodies. And when you get a narrow body and the bird's too small, you're not going to get a good carcass. You're not going to get a good carcass. Now, let me give you a little side note. I am currently breeding New Hampshires, and I've been breeding New Hampshires since 2011, when we were able to secure a closed strain. Now you may go, what's a closed strain? Well, I'll let Karen decide. We might discuss that a little bit further. But I've been breeding these New Hampshires personally since 2011. So for about 10 years. You will also, a common fault in the birds is a flat front on the males. You'll also find they have pale, sometimes when you look at the variation, is you'll find a pale or an enamel white on the earlobes. The earlobes, according to the standard, you need a red earlobe. So you want to avoid any kind of pale or enamel white. So obviously, you want to read the standard of perfection and make sure that you have a clear understanding of the proper color in both sexes in the bird. So here's just a couple of things to remember before we continue on in the show. Remember that proper selection, now this is the silhouette of the New Hampshire. And I think, remember I talked last week about the black Australorp. The silhouette, the outline, you should be able to, as you're learning your breed, as you're learning chickens, and you look at the different breeds, you should be able to look at a silhouette and say, that is a New Hampshire. That's a New Hampshire. And so proper selection. Let me give you a couple of things to remember if you're thinking about breeding New Hampshire chickens. Proper selection should be done based on the rate of growth. Rate of growth is very, very important. All right. You also want to watch the color. Sometimes when I hatch out a big batch, let's say 200 or 300 New Hampshires, there's going to be a lot of color variation. And you always want to select based on the proper color of the bird. So you want to pay attention to that. Frankly, our egg production, the egg production in the strain of New Hampshires that we have is excellent. Another thing you want to watch for is broodiness into the females. Now, I told you this last week about the Australorps, and I'm going to mention this to you. The same is true for a New Hampshire. And what am I referring to? Broodiness. Remember this, all right? New Hampshires, just like an Australorp, can be notorious for broodiness. Now, frankly, in the strain that I have, zero broodiness or minimal broodiness. And the reason I say that, well, the way that the strain became like that is I don't tolerate broodiness. If you want broodiness, you can breed it in or you can breed it out. But you do need to watch that when you're breeding a New Hampshire chicken. Couple other things. Remember, both the sexes tend to be too small, and too small a bird can be associated with small eggs. We need a good size egg. And remember, the tail is very, very important. You can see that in the pictures here. The tail angle, it's very important. That influences the shape of the back. And the back is one of the most important attributes of this breed. And so that's just a little overview of the breed. We're going to talk a little bit more about the history when we get our guest on. So I want you to notice I have judged Stephen Gribble he's been breeding New Hamps for a number of years. And I want you to notice, to me, I was grateful that Steve was willing to share these with us, because you can see the body type in these birds. You look at the female, number 2 there, picture number 2. She's a nice kind of short and cobby bird. All right. she's got depth of body, and so does the male in picture number 1. He's got depth of body, and he's not too long. I think the standard says that the back should be moderately long. We might have to revisit that, but you don't want a super long body. You don't want a super long body in the bird. So that gives you a little bit of description about the way that we want the body to look. So, Karen, where are we going from here?
That's it. We're going to summarize this breed up and then get to the meat.
To the meat, like the meat bird.
That's right.
Dun, 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 dun.
Morning.
Morning, it's afternoon. Hey, let me tell you a little bit about our guest. His name is Edgar Mongold. Greetings, Edgar.
Greetings, Jim.
Did you really think it was morning?
Yeah. Well, Karen's been cracking the whip on me, so kind of lost track of time.
Yes. Well, let me introduce you briefly to our guest, Edgar Mongold. Edgar lives up in the state of Ohio, and actually, Ohio is that's one of the most famous chicken states in all of the 50 states. And so Edgar and I were talking a little bit before the show, and we think, at least as far back as he and I can remember, that we met in 1991 in Centerville, Michigan. I was living in Michigan, and I was actually going through my my judge's apprenticeship program. And I think, if I remember correctly, I was clerking with a gentleman by the name of Lewis Cunningham. You know that name, Edgar?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, anyways, Edgar and I go way back, and he loves New Hampshires. When I think of people who love the New Hampshire chicken, I told Karen, I'm like, we got to get Edgar on the show. And so, Edgar, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, all right.
So, go ahead.
Where are we at here, Karen? You helped me along the way. Aha! The New Hampshire Club. That's right. I was asking you about the New Hampshire Club. Now, real quick, Edgar, is there only one breed club for the New Hampshires?
Well, it's difficult to even say there's one. We're just kind of a loose-knit group of individuals that we definitely aren't the traditional breed club.
Okay. Well, and I might just say here that, I have been a part of breed clubs. I was the president of the Plymouth Rock Fanciers Club for a number of years. And actually, we celebrated the 50th year celebration of the Plymouth Rock Fanciers Club in Columbus, Ohio in 1998. So I've been in and out of breed clubs just like you have, Edgar, for all of our chicken life. And one thing is, clubs come, clubs go, and but definitely, and I know that this particular group of people are really have a presence on the web and on Facebook. But I encourage people, participate in these clubs however you can, and that would be my encouragement to you. So we at least want to acknowledge that there is a community of people that associate with the New Hampshire Breeders Club. So anyways, Karen.
Thought maybe Edgar could tell us about these paintings from then.
Well, I don't quite go back that far. I have the privilege.
You're old, but you're not that old.
I have the privilege of getting with Ken Bowles, who was the last living individual that was on the getting the New Hampshire's recognized by the APA. The original New Hampshire, and it had red in it, Club of America, commissioned one of our greatest poultry artists, A.O. Schilling. And
He was amazing.
And the breed club itself commissioned him, and this is the pictures. Have been able to locate the paintings, but actually even coming up with these pictures was rather difficult.
Well, I tell you, Edgar, I mean, Schilling, when I read the description in the standard, when I think of a New Hampshire, this is it. This is it, isn't it?
Yes.
It really is. I mean, and anybody who's thinking about breeding New Hampshire chickens, man, you ought to tag this video and use it over and over and over and over and over. And so, you know, Edgar, let me ask you, when we think about Schilling, you know, he was one of a kind. And I don't know if we'll ever have another Schilling come around, at least in our lifetime. But he was a great, great mentor of paintings of ideal poultry. When you think of mentors, who are some of your mentors along the way?
Well, they're still going.
Are they?
Yes. I started with Raleigh Blockberger and Elwin Long, Clarence Borger, and a whole ton of others.
Now, wait a minute. You just named some names that I'm not familiar with. When you say they're still going, are they still alive?
Oh, no. Those individuals aren't. And they were more on a local level. I met them at a county, but they did tri-state showing. Okay. And they just loved poultry.
That's great. Are there any living guys that are living that you would say really had an influence on you with poultry and judging and exhibiting and breeding? Is there any?
Oh, wow. Don Schreider, Clell Egler, Dan Orner. These are my go-to people.
Yeah, you know who was one of my favorite Ohio guys when I was clerking? One of my favorite, I'm curious, Wilbur Stauffer.
Oh, yes.
That man knew a chicken. And not only did he know a chicken, but I remember in his heyday, he'd take hundreds and hundreds of birds. He was called a stringman, wasn't he? Wasn't he,
yes,
Edgar?
Yes.
Yeah. What was a stringman? Since I have you on here, I mean, what was a stringman?
Well, to put it bluntly, a stringman was an individual that bet that they had the knowledge to select birds and make money competing against others on the fair circuit.
Right.
And we're not talking 100, 200 birds. You know, now if we've got an individual that does 300,
we think that's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I just I had to ask you about that and your mentors, and so, anyways, Karen.
Yeah, I was wondering. You know, when Jim said, like you said, we brought up New Hamps, and he immediately said, "I've got the New Hamp guy. I need Edgar." But did you start with New Hamps? Did you do other breeds, and then land on one?
Actually, my first ones that I exhibited was from a local hatchery that were famous locally for their dual purpose. And surprisingly enough, New Hampshire was one of the parents. And after that first year, my mentors got me into exhibition birds. And back then, they were raised as livestock. They had the old traditional, if it was dual purpose, it had to produce.
Yeah.
If they were like Cornish, they better be able to put the meat on. And our Mediterranean birds, the thing of it is, what a lot of people don't realize, that leghorns, there was a time when they were in the meat market. They were called squab broilers.
So Edgar, you had New Hampshire from the very beginning.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I had experience with Andrew Christie's line of New Hampshire.
Did you really?
Yes.
Wow.
And they were right. They were a more of a meat strain that was light. They were more of a Biffish color, so that they would dress out well.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, I've got the big question for you. Jim, I think, covered that they were admitted to the APA in 1935. So that's more recent than a lot of birds, in the standard. So any ideas why they made a New Hampshire? Why weren't they satisfied with the birds that were already in the standard?
Well, I haven't been able to track down the original chicken breeders from New Hampshire and actually southern Massachusetts that went into Rhode Island and brought Rhode Island's back. And then through their selection, they created an entirely different breed just based on good livability, rapid growth, high production, good hatchability, and fast feathering probably changed the color from a Rhode Island Red as much as anything. And they had a lot of other utility. And that was basically all they cared about.
Yeah, and I said it in the beginning, Edgar, and I can't remember where I read this, or frankly, it might have been, to me, it might have been a piece of information that came from Don Schreider, but I've been preaching it for years and years and years that pre-Cornish cross, the New Hampshire and the Delaware were the top two meat birds in America. They were producing, and I'm sure obviously Christie had a huge part in that, but and a Rhode Island Red is much slower growing. It's got a longer body and they take so long to finish. And so these poultry producers, they were so, they needed, as you said it perfectly. Initially, they were selecting for that, for that rapid growth and higher production and good hatchability, and fast feathering was key. Now, the broiler that we eat, man, them feathers grow fast. And so that was a key part in the early days, in the beginning of the New Hampshire chicken. And the history that I read about Andrew Christie, it was definitely a utility bird that, to answer your question, Karen, they wanted utility, and meat was a huge part of that. And obviously they also wanted it to be able to produce eggs. So it's a really, really historical chicken when you think about it. Even though it's not as old as Rhode Island Reds and Buckeyes and Barred Plymouth Rocks, it was a pivotal, still is, in my opinion, a very, very pivotal chicken for all of the last 150 years of history with chicken. So is that kind of what you were looking for, Karen?
Yeah. I just just checking. Trying not to get my feathers up, as a Rhode Island Red.
Well, let me
enthusiast.
interrupt
listen.
you, Karen. Jim has commented on Delaware being right up there as a meat producing. The Delaware is actually a combination of the New Hampshire and one of the probably number one bird in the nation, and that was the barred rock. And they combined those two and came up with the Delaware.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing I want to add here, Karen, I know you're a Rhode Island Red breeder, and you love your Rhode Island Reds. And Rhode Island Reds, I can't wait till we discuss that breed somewhere down the road. But a Rhode Island Red, what it has done, it's so cool how each individual breed has impacted the poultry industry. And I mean, the Rhode Island Red and its history of so many others, and I know I'm not supposed to talk about Rhode Island Reds, but they are a true dual purpose bird when it comes to egg and meat, and we'll come back to that. But what about this? Don't you have that red New Hampshire?
I still struggle. That's right. So you're telling me that they took Rhode Island Reds in whatever year they first started their project, but they turned them from the Rhode Island Reds from the new Rhode Island Reds into the New Hampshires with just selection. They didn't add any other birds in. They didn't. Yes, that's selection is that powerful. Yeah.
Now, when you look at that Rhode Island Red on the left, you're looking at 1919, and these farmers started the process in 1910. So this is actually what they started with, and now look at 1945, what it's developed into.
But you're exactly right, Karen, the power of selection. And I will preach that to my grave, to every chicken, whether you're doing for production or exhibition or whatever you're doing, the power of selection. So if I remember right, and I need to, Edgar, there were no other breeds that were brought in, were there? I mean, they made that we did this from selection from the Rhode Island Reds to the New Hampshires, correct?
Yes, that's what the information states.
Yeah. It says in the standard, the breed has come into being by a gradual process of development over a period of years, beginning around 19 and 15, from the foundation of Rhode Island Reds, first brought into New Hampshire from Rhode Island and southern Massachusetts. There is no record, Edgar, it says here in the standard, no record of outside blood having been introduced, and the breed has been developed by farm poultrymen of New Hampshire by the continual selection of breeding stock for, here it is again, early maturity, large brown-shelled eggs, quick feathering, strength and vigor. I love that. During the long period of its evolution, they were admitted to the standard of perfection in 1935. Look at her lining up the history here. That's great. Yeah. And go ahead, Edgar.
One thing that a lot of people don't realize is the New Hampshire is probably the only one, or one of a very few breeds that actually was developed first, and then the standard was written for it.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, listen to this. You remember a name by the name John Skinner, Edgar?
Yes, I do. I met him.
Okay. I wish I could have met him. He was a cheesehead, University of
Wisconsin.
Was. But listen to what he says. He says of a New Hampshire. He says they possess a deep, broad body. They grow feathers very rapidly. And he wrote, I can't remember what year he wrote this, but he goes on to say, are prone to go broody, make good mothers. Most pin feathers are reddish buff in color. Therefore, he says, John Skinner says, do not detract from the carcass appearance as much as a white bird. The color is medium to light red and often fades in the sunshine. The comb is single, medium to large in size. The female often. And you notice this. And I looked and looked and looked and looked for one of my favorite New Hampshire heads. She's got a little flop on the back of the comb, on the single comb. And that's what the standard says, doesn't it, Edgar?
Yes, that's true.
And so he goes on and he says, these, the comb is single, medium to size. In the females, it often lops a little. And these good medium-sized meat chickens have fair egg-laying ability. Some strains lay darker eggs. New Hampshires can be competitive, and they can be aggressive. I've learned that. So you got to watch that when you're breeding. And and you know what else is? They were initially used. This is so cool. They were initially used in the Chicken of Tomorrow contests back in the early 40s, which led to that whole contest is what kind of opened up the modern day broiler industry. So anyways, as you can tell, I get pretty excited about New Hampshire. So does Edgar. So
well,
let's see.
In the Chicken of Tomorrow that Jim alludes to, the New Hampshire never won top spot. But when you look at the number that New Hampshire placed through the top 10, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah. And let's see, where are we at, Karen? I'm so excited.
I'm wondering if we can talk about, maybe the New Hampshire can someday be the Chicken of Tomorrow still.
Well, I'll tell you this. Don Schreider and I and a couple of other guys, we talked about maybe a chicken contest called the Chicken of Yesterday instead of the Chicken of Tomorrow. It's the Chicken of Yesterday. But what did you look at this carcass?
Yeah,
Edgar, that's a mighty fine looking carcass on a New Hampshire that comes from Mr. Frank Reese.
That's a good carcass on any of the heritage breeds.
Yeah.
In that.
Yeah.
And this date, I think, Edgar, you said this data was straight from Frank's.
Yes.
The pounds and how many weeks and how much they dress out as. So.
Yes, and I verified it. And the funny thing about it is, you would think that categories and the weights would be carved in stone.
Yeah.
They aren't.
No. And I will comment on that one of the most valuable things that Frank Reese does. By the way, Frank has had a huge influence on my thinking about production qualities in standard bred birds. He, along with Don, but one of the things that, Frank does is he selects. It's the art of selection. It's the necessity and the priority of selection that he puts the bird in his hand and says, is this bird going to produce a good carcass, both the males and the females? And so it's of great importance. You won't get this. And I'm just playing off the comment that Edgar just made. If you don't select for this carcass, generation after generation after generation, you won't get it. You'll get a scrawny looking carcass that most people in the marketplace will look at and go, I'll think 3 or 4 of them to feed a grown man because there's no meat on it. And Frank Reese has really, really helped and challenged my thinking along the way. Matter of fact, I'll tell you this. I don't know if this fits in here, but I'm going to make this comment. I'll save that thought. What else did we want to discuss here, Karen?
Jim, let me ask you something.
You go ahead.
Do you remember the correct wordage that Frank says? The only way we're going to preserve.
Oh, yeah. That's what I was getting at. And I went ahead and postponed it.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is what he said.
Say it now.
This is a quote. Okay, Karen, we'll wait.
No, say it. Say it. Say it. Don't save it. Tell us. Yeah.
He said, we must eat these birds to keep them alive. And I went scrambling for my pen. I was at Frank's house. This is right around 2009, 2010, right around in there. And he said, Jim, we've got to eat these birds in order to keep them alive. And I went scrambling for my pen. And that is foundational of everything I believe about standard bred poultry. He said, you got to eat these birds to keep them alive. And what he meant was, if they're not a bird that we can use for production, for eating, for production of meat, for production of eggs, we're going to lose them. And that's a fact. That is a total fact. Edgar, you and I have watched for the last 25 years, large fowl are getting less and less and less at the poultry shows. More bantams, more bantams, more bantams, because we're no longer eating them. They've turned into a hobby. And I know there's so many people that disagree with me, but that's okay. We got to eat these birds to keep them alive, right? So there you go, Karen.
There you go. So the breeders that we're selecting and what they were looking for, you talked about rapid growth, high production, good hatchability. Who doesn't want good hatchability? Although that, again, still sticks with me a little bit. So you're telling me the Rhode Island Reds didn't hatch well, but we'll ignore that. Fast feathering. So they weren't really looking for a specific color. Like, they didn't say, I need to take this Rhode Island Red and I want to make it a multicolored bird so it's prettier, right? I mean, they were...
No, actually what happens is, as you go for faster and faster feathering, you're going to lighten up that Rhode Island Red color. It isn't like they said, we're going to change this color because we want to be different from the Rhode Island Red. It just happened.
Yeah.
Well, here's the other thing. I'm writing this down. I want all of our listeners, you got to remember something. Color is important, but there's two other things that are more important than color. Number one is body type. Body type. Body type. The silhouette. Whether it's an Australorp last week, a New Hampshire this week, or when we talk about a Rhode Island Red or a Wyandotte or a Dominique, they all have different type. And type is first. And the second thing is standard qualities. So that's leg color, skin color, eye color, kind of comb. Standard, what the standard says about specific qualities. Color's third. So really, in a sense, Karen, they did say, wow, we have these other qualities, and color wasn't the primary issue. It is important. We have a written description now in the Standard of Perfection about the color of a New Hampshire, but it was definitely not the priority in the beginning. Are you getting it, Karen?
I am, but I just can't. I keep thinking that this happened, in the 20s, right? So the 20s, by the time it actually finished, it takes a while. So it's the same thing people are going through now. People, there are a lot of breeds out there that think they should be a part of the standard. Go ahead.
I'm going to give it to you so it's simple. You're raising Rhode Island Reds, right?
Mm-hmm.
The New Hampshire is just an improved Rhode Island Red.
That's pretty much what I'm hearing. That's my problem.
Except for Rhode Island Red breeders.
Edgar, you can't keep taking jabs at the Rhode Island Red. Rhode Island Reds are great chickens, and you've got some great, we're losing our large fowl Rhode Island Red breeders too. That's why, Karen, what you're doing with, and I know I'm not supposed to pump up your head, but what you're doing with the Red.
On. Yeah.
Well, you were asking, how do we get birds into the standard? Let me explain that, because I know, just for the sake of time, but I think this is a critical question. When the New Hampshires came into the standard, I don't know how the process was then, but here's how the process works now. We have what we call a standard revision committee. And that standard revision committee is appointed by the directors and the officers of the American Poultry Association. So when someone wants to get a breed, I know plenty of them. I'll give you an illustration. There's a chicken called a cream leg bar. It's not in the standard of perfection, the American standard of perfection. It is in the British standard. In order to get that cream leg bar into the standard of perfection for the American Poultry Association, there's a submission process. And that submission process is actually, it's on the website of the American Poultry Association, and there's guidelines, and they ask you. So anybody, now it's not easy process, but anybody with a breed, or they think is a breed, or a breed from the UK, or a breed from Germany that they want, I was a part of, one of my greatest waterfowl friends is Dave Holdery. And Dave was very instrumental in getting some breed, the silver apple yards of the Saxonies. I was working closely with Dave Holdery when those two breeds from Europe got into the standard of the American Poultry Association. So there is a process. And if you want to champion, hey, we're going to get in what's that one called? The sunflower chicken. No, the something flower.
Swedish flower.
There is the Swedish flower. And anybody who has Swedish flowers who's listening, you're like, Jim, you didn't even say it right. Just please forgive me, because there's all kinds of other new little breeds that have come from the UK and other places into the United States. But does that kind of answer your question, Karen?
Yeah. I'm just thinking, back then, all the people, you've always got this struggle between, I'm going to say the old people and the new people, but age is not the issue. It's the long-standing poultry people, and the newer, is why do you need new breeds? Isn't there enough to work with? So I'm just thinking that even back then, it would have been the same way, that.
I assure you, don't you think, Edgar, back then, some of them Rhode Island Red people would say, what in the world do we need that New Hampshire for? Just like actually, there was the barred Plymouth Rock was the first color, wasn't it, Edgar?
Yes.
And then we got whites and partridges and silver penciled and all these.
The whites were sport out of the barns.
There you go.
The other ones, just man created and.
Yeah, Karen, you've got a very good point. I assure you. And there's pushback. But I'll tell you this. I believe the leadership that we currently have in the APA, it values the history and has a tight grip on the history, but they have an open hand about the future. And, if you prove yourself to be faithful, it's just like, some breeds got in there way too fast. Remember, Edgar, the black crested white Polish?
Yes.
How I remember when they came into the standard. Have you seen one since? No. Anyways, Karen, let's move on.
All right. So I'm going to ask you now about, you keep talking about Andrew Christie, right? Was it Andrew Christie?
I never knew anything about him till today.
Yeah. Oh, well, then we don't need to go into it. Your recent history of
No, he was amazing. But go ahead, ask your question.
Well, you guys both thought he had a big influence on maybe even to the point of there was a change in the New Hampshire standard. They added a second paragraph to the introduction, and you guys were thinking that it was maybe even because of a single human being. And I thought that seemed amazing.
Are you talking about that paragraph that says the special meat strains are now developed?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did we ever figure out when that was added into the standard?
So it was not in my 1942 standard, but is in the 1953 standard. So I'm going to say sometime between 42 and 53.
Wow. So. Okay. So what was your question to us that kind of revolves around that subject?
Yeah, well, I just wondered how you say, we just talked about how you can add a breed to the standard. And so now I was wondering, how do you change the standard of a breed? Like once it exists, once you're in the book, like, and there's always talk in breeders and breed clubs of, we need to get the standard changed because, and then a variety of reasons. But how does that?
And Edgar we can both comment on this, but the old historical breeds, very, very few, if any, changes. Am I right, Edgar?
Yes.
Rhode Island Reds, Plymouth Rocks, even the Australorps, even the proper standard on an Orpington. Very few changes. And so over the years, you've got maybe some leg color issues that sometimes get changed. But what happens is, Karen, is the same thing, and maybe I'm talking too much and you jump in here, but the same thing is when you bring a breed into the standard, is if you want to change, and this is where I think breed clubs are valuable, Edgar. Let's take Well Summers. Well Summers, if you want to change in the standard, or the Morans, because there's a lot of Moran activity across America now. He's laughing. And if you want to change something in the standard, that standard revision committee will often go to the clubs, to the Well Summer Club, to the new, or they might even go to a New Hampshire breeder, a one that's respected, one that has been breeding them for a long time, and they'll say, hey, is this a correction or a change that we should make in the standard of perfection? What would you add to that, Edgar? Am I saying it right?
Well, yes, they do change. With New Hampshires, like other breeds and even varieties, there was a big difference in color between the American Bantam Association and the American Poultry Association. And it was in the 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, that the club decided to combine them. And Jim, you want to talk about jumping through hoops? It's not the easiest thing to do.
No. Well, and I value that it's not easy. Otherwise, we'd be changing things on a whim. And to me, the history of the Rhode Island Red and the history of the Plymouth Rock and the history of the Wyandotte, we would be all over the place. And so I'm glad they're a little bit more guarded and careful and have some real proven track record before we make changes in the standard. Don't you think so, Edgar?
Well, what you got to tell, Jim, is the standard description, the written description doesn't change. But boy, take a look at the illustrations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Karen, how we doing?
We're good. I'm going to finally let you look at some birds together. So, but all right. So I'm not sure which pictures you want to look at, but you mentioned the heads before. So let me go ahead and pull up some heads for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Edgar, that's 6A. I found that. Now, what do you think of that head, Edgar?
Well, first of all, let me say the only thing I look at points on is if it distracts from the head. Right. And when you look at the width of skull on this bird, the eye placement, the wattles, the short beak, and the lobe, it would take an awful lot of points for me to be concerned about the points. Now, the points are nice, and how you want to say that, sawtooth, they aren't needle point or anything, which is good. But
you like her beak, though, and the depth of her head.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that male, his head looks pretty balanced, so I think we've got pretty good representation, and we can always get better pictures. And I told you I've got a picture that I've spent hours looking for since we've been planning this show. But what's another picture there, Karen?
Well, one I like about these two is rugged comes to mind on this.
Yeah.
Boy, we can really see the skull on these.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is one thing I do see is we have continuity, don't we?
Yes.
There's continuity in the color. There's consistency. That's the word I was looking for. Yeah.
Down color is one thing that I use to, if you're able to tell anything about the genetics, I found that down color helps me out a lot.
Right. Edgar, comment on these bantams here. Obviously, again, pictures don't always do us justice, but you really like these, don't you?
I like the female a whole lot more than I do the male. I would like to see him a little more cobby, which he's got a decent width of back, but if he was more cobby, I think the width would be better. Both bantams, what can I say? Wing carriage is a constant battle. And these, they've got decent wing carriage in that.
Yeah.
When you're saying cobby, what word are you using?
You're not going to find that in the standard.
Well, explain it. Explain it, Edgar.
Wow.
Well, Jim used that word too, so you're not the only one. I just don't know what it means.
It's kind of like one of them terms that people use, like in Old English, they say they want the body to feel corky.
Cobby.
You know, corky.
Oh, I ain't never heard that
one. It's in the judging instructions on the ABA. You will not find a definition of that.
Cobby, in my mind, Karen, is short. Short and cobby is the term we use. So what I would elaborate on. By the way, Edgar, did you handle both these these birds?
Hell, they were at my place. She still is.
Wow. Well, no wonder you like them so much. But why would you keep something you don't like, right? The key is this: he's handled the birds and he's familiar with their breeding, and so this is good stuff. It's very, very good stuff.
One thing I'll brag on that female on. She came back in even, which has been a real problem on the bantams, but she is laying at 3 years old as good as pullets. And
now listen,
I really like.
Yeah. Now listen, Edgar, I didn't realize there were New Hampshires in Australia, but you found this bird that belongs to Steve Gauchi.
Yes, he sent pictures in. It's surprising on our Facebook page, the international following that we have. And this bird here is a little different than ours. A lot of people would complain about the color, the V over the back, but when I look at the front end on her,
you can see the body, huh? You can see the front end.
Love it.
With the body across the back. I bet you this bird there's a good chance it'll look just like or similar to that Frank Reese carcass that we showed you earlier in the show. Don't you think?
Oh, yes. The body on this is phenomenal.
Yep. All right. What else we got here? There's the 2020 New Hampshire Breeder Club's Breeders Club of America National Meet. Kay and
I actually had the pleasure of getting stomped by this bird. Drove 15 hours out there to get beat, and she was sweet.
well, I tell you, you can tell, and I'm nitpicking, but you can tell somebody's trying to get her to show because her wings are down just a little bit. But I bet when she's showing, she tucks them up where they're supposed to be, doesn't she, Edgar?
Oh man! Every time I walked by that row, she was always showing. A lot of the others left down. Okay, Karen, that is what I call cobby, for want of a better word.
She still doesn't get it, but that's okay.
No, that's okay. I don't yet. I haven't yet moved to the better breed. I'm still stuck on the.
Hey, Edgar, before we move on this picture, K and K Bantams, where do they live?
I think they're in Texas.
Okay.
It's a father and daughter combination.
These are Lone Star New Hampshires.
And the funny part about it is their grandson, Keith's grandson, has been waxing him all year long with a bird that Corey picked out when he was just a young bird. So Grandpa's had to take kind of a back seat to him.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of males. These are both from Steve's place. Again, the number 8, he's probably, he looks like he's got his head way up, and he's probably watching out for the females. But on number 9, this male was probably just, maybe getting ready to peck something on the ground. But I do want you to notice, Edgar, on that number 9 male, I like his body. It's got depth. It's got depth. It's got a good front on it. I mean, when you look at type, do you like that bird, number 9?
I like him.
Yeah.
Not that it has anything to do with his body, but that wing carriage is phenomenal. But
it really is.
You're right, Jim. Disregarding that altogether, the width, the back, the depth, and he's not a long bird. He's short like they're supposed to be.
I actually, and I'm not sure where it came from, but I'm a little frustrated with some too much length that I've got on my current generation that I'm growing out. And so when Steve sent us this picture, I definitely wanted to comment on this bird. So female, and same with the females. I like the body type. Again, Edgar, the female number 10, her wings are up, aren't they?
Yes, both of them
up where we want them to be. How do you like her tail angle on bird number 10?
Well, she's got a decent tail angle, but there's something about the tail, the main tail feathers themselves.
Yeah, it could be. It's dark, little darker picture, but anyways, I know Steve is doing he's doing a great job and spending a lot of time on his New Hampshires. Now, Edgar, here, this is another one of our ideal pictures, is it not?
That's what I try to breed for, and mine are still a work in progress. Those are ones I keep prints of just to remind me what to look for.
Yeah.
Well, and you think about it, you're still working on this. You started,
80
with the first bird you got. So can you imagine if the standard revision committee went ahead and changed the standard on you that you've been working on all those years? So.
That's a great comment there.
Yeah.
Karen, see, I totally agree with you. And it's that's a good thought.
Yeah. So I'm trying to I've lost my mouse. There it is. Um, so that's basically it here. So you want to thank Edgar, Jim?
Oh, Edgar, you're we got to do this again, and we are very grateful.
Thank you very much.
You've put a lot of preparation and your lovely wife helping you get all in sync with all the modern day electronics. And Edgar, you are a great, great blessing to the poultry world. And we didn't even talk about Saramas and the history of Saramas in the last 15
Karen,
years. But
I want to thank you because it made putting up with Jim a lot easier. we go back too far not to run on each other.
No,
well,
I really appreciate all the effort you put in and the time you put into this. I couldn't have asked for more. So I thank you.
Edgar, I have great respect for you, and I appreciate all that I have learned from you over the years. And so we're out of here. So we'll see you on the next episode. And
yeah, we're gonna do our first focus on feeding next week. We're gonna have Jeff Maddox on to talk fish meal. So if you have any fish meal questions, make sure to hit us up. So that's it for today though.
Awesome.
All right.
See you guys.